Welcome to Act 2 of this Are You a Person 3-part miniseries. Get yourself ready because we are going on a serious journey into the word person like you've never seen before. So strap in, get your seatbelt on nice and tight because we are going proper off-road on a wild exploration. So Act 2 begins now. Let's get straight into it by getting into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 6 is the part that I am most interested in showing you. This article reads, "Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law." This is fascinating because this is the first article in which the word person is used throughout this document. Up until this point, the Declaration talks about everyone repeatedly. This clearly shows us that there is a vital distinction between everyone and person. This distinction is further enhanced by the fact that being recognized as a person before the law is a right that everyone has, which of course a right can be exercised or not. It completely depends on what you want to identify as and what you are actually trying to achieve. The next turning in our journey will take us down the route of the United Nations, who have a webpage called the UN Legal Identity Agenda. Here, you can find loads of publications all about legal identity. One such publication is the publication called the United Nations Strategy for Legal Identity for All, which is really fascinating and actually helps us understand this whole idea of personhood really well. So I invite you to spend some time with me exploring a few of the extracts from this publication. So the publication I am talking about is an actual official United Nations publication created in 2019. The link to the PDF of this publication can be found on the screen, so you can check it out yourself to really see how much of a gem this document is. So the publication begins with an introduction. This introduction reads as follows. 1. Everyone has the right to be recognized as a person before the law, as enshrined in Article 6 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and several international human rights instruments. 2. To address this, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, agreed by all member states in September 2015, established a specific target within the Sustainable Development Goals, Target 16.9, Legal Identity for All. 3. As civil registration provides an official record of the existence of the person and the recognition of that individual before the law, it has been the fundamental means of granting legal identity. Furthermore, civil registration is recognized as the ultimate source for production of comprehensive, regular, and reliable vital statistics. So we can see that there is a distinction between the person and the individual, right? Words really do matter and they are not used by chance. They're not just used for the sake of it, right? We can see that the official record of the person and the legal personality, or what they're terming here, legal identity, that comes with the person, that is how an individual, so a living man or woman, that is how they are actually recognized before the law. This logically means that without the legal personality identity, the law does not recognize you, which obviously will have its own pros and cons. Now we move on to point 6. Point 6 reads, equally importantly, good governance as promoted by the United Nations and the World Bank invariably includes ensuring the proper and universal registration of the occurrence of all vital events, in brackets, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, ... The issuance of certificates that serve as legal tenders and introduce the lifetime legal legal identity of the individual and the production of comprehensive, regular, and reliable vital statistics based on universal civil registration of vital events. So what are the key things to highlight from this extract? Well, first, notice how the vital events, so the births, deaths, marriages, and divorces, must be registered. Then, notice how certificates must be issued that serve as legal tenders, which is a very interesting choice of words, legal tenders. Then notice how the birth certificate will introduce the lifetime legal identity for the individual. So you can see that the span of the usage of the legal identity will actually be the natural lifespan of the individual. Again, showing a clear distinction between the individual and the legal identity. And this also shows us that the individual had to come first before the legal identity could have been created. And lastly, the most interesting part of all of this for me here is actually that the certificates that are issued by their very own words serve as legal tenders. And this made me think, what else do we all commonly recognize as serving as legal tenders? The Bank of England promissory notes, right? Or any central bank notes for any country for that matter, right? Words are never chosen by accident. Legal tender is used when referring to promissory notes of the central bank because the promise is what we consider the value, and that is the legal tender. So this actually links very nicely to my previous mini-series called The Truths You Haven't Been Told About Trust, where we actually talk about legal tender and the effect of the abandonment of the gold standard, which led to the acceptance by law that promises, regardless of whether or not they're actually backed by something, are considered valuable in our society. So do check out that mini-series for more information on the legal tenders aspect. But isn't it interesting that the certificates themselves serve as legal tenders? So they are under the same category as promissory notes created by the bank of your country. This can only therefore logically mean that the births, deaths, marriages, divorce certificates are all considered promissory notes as well. I mean, this is why they serve as legal tenders, right? I'm only using the United Nations' own words here. Why would they be given the same classification if they weren't the same thing? This information is going to come in very handy for you as your knowledge begins to deepen, so keep these ideas firmly in your head. The next section is section 7, which reads, the assessment of adult population without valid proof of legal identity, as well as the number of unregistered children, thus not conferred with legal identity, varies, yet it is certainly considerable. For example, when it comes to fully functioning and universal registration of births and deaths, essential instruments for conferring and retiring legal identity, respectfully, it is lacking in almost half of the world's countries. The World Bank Group estimates that around 1 million individuals do not possess proofs of legal identity. UNICEF estimates that around 50 million newborns worldwide are not registered nor conferred with the birth certificate, thus lacking legal identity in any given year. So we can see from this extract that it is actually possible to exist in the world without having a legal identity. We can see that it is the birth certificate which confers, or in simple words, gives the newborn the legal personality or the identity that they will be using throughout their lifetime. We see that if you're not given a birth certificate, then you are not given a legal identity. So this really solidifies the order of how things happen, right? The newborn comes first, then the birth certificate, then the legal identity or legal personality. Now, when you head all the way down to the definition section, point 12 is rather interesting. It reads, for the purpose of the operational United Nations definition, legal identity is defined as the basic characteristics of an individual's identity, e.g., name, sex, place, and date of birth conferred through the registration and the issuance of a certificate by an authorized civil registration authority following the occurrence of birth. In the absence of birth registration, legal identity may be conferred by a legally recognized identification authority. This system should be linked to the civil registration system to ensure a holistic approach to legal identity from birth to death. Legal identity is retired by the issuance of a death certificate by the civil registration authority upon registration of death. So we can see, first you have to have the individual born who has natural characteristics, for example, their sex. Then the birth event gets recorded on a birth certificate, where the individual is then gifted a legally recognized name. Then from this birth certificate, the legal identity is created so that the individual can later on actually be recognized as existing before the law. So in other words, they are able to be recognized when they enter into contract or interact within any capacity with the legal system. The legal person is then retired upon the death of the individual, again showing us that things have to happen first to the individual that's alive before they can have an impact on the legal personality or the legal identity. Again, this shows us once more that the individual came first before all of these legal personalities or legal identities can be introduced. The word retired is also interesting because this word is typically used when we talk about someone who is no longer working, right? So this makes sense because when an individual passes away, they are no longer working as such in the 3D world, right? However, the interesting thing is that despite the individual no longer being with us, their legal personality or their legal identity will continue to exist. In fact, it will exist forever in the records. Once someone passes away, their legal personality will continue to exist because death does not impact the legal personality because it was never alive in the first place. The only things that are not impacted by death are those things that were never alive in the first instance. This is quite logical, right? Section 20 of the publication, the key part that I want to just focus on is the bit that states legal identity of all persons. This shows us quite clearly that the legal personality or the legal identity, whatever you want to call it, right, is that of the person. It's the person which we have discussed previously, so the artificial version of us, the one that is not affected by death because it is not alive. Again, more and more evidence of the clear distinctions between the two are really starting to arise, and hopefully you are beginning to realize that there are almost like two parallel universes that are going on at the same time. So Section 21 states that member states have the responsibility to recognize all individuals present on their territory as a person before the law. Again, more and more evidence showing us the difference between the individual and the person, with the person being the legal personality that is recognized by the law, which on the contrary, the individuals, living men and women, are not. This is so interesting because it really shows us that the law only recognizes creatures of the law, those things that are created and crafted by the law, but that which is not a creature of the law, so basically creations of nature that are alive, they are not recognized. They aren't recognized because the law didn't create them. Something else did. And we know the saying, you control what you create, right? Well, obviously the opposite will also be true. You cannot control what you did not create. It gets even better. So Section 30 reads as follows. In the context of the identity management, the essential purpose of civil registration is to furnish legal instruments of direct interest to individuals. Societies today, even the least developed among them, exhibit considerable complexity in interpersonal relations and increasing bureaucratization. Bureaucratization. Let's just go with that. In dealings between individuals and the state. Hence, it is important to ensure certainty in legal matters, that individuals be provided with probatory instruments which allow them to prove with ironclad certainty the facts relating to their existence, identity, and personal and family situation. The principal reason for the existence of civil registration, its basic purpose, and one that must be facilitated by the state, is to serve as an institution capable of disclosing facts relating to civil status based on technical legal principles, through which individuals can be assured of the legitimacy and authenticity of civil status-related facts in order to accredit them to other individuals or the administration itself by means of public registration documents known as certifications. So we can see that the purpose of the civil registration is to give individuals a legal instrument that evidences their interest. But an interest in what exactly? The legal personality or the identity, of course. You get a copy of your birth certificate, not the original, which is proof of your beneficial entitlement or interest to the legal personality identity that was created from the original birth certificate. But the question is, where is the original? Well, the government holds on to it, of course, for your benefit, because you are the one who's using the legal personality, right? Which is their creation, so their property, but you are the one using it for you to be able to live, right? Well, hey, would you look at that? It's a hidden trust relationship. I mean, let's think of this logically. If you're not the beneficially entitled one, then how come if someone else tried to use your legal identity for themselves, then they would be committing identity fraud? But when you use it, you're not committing identity fraud as such. It's obvious, no? The last bit that is also key here is that individuals can use the civil status related facts, so the data that the certificates literally state on them, right, to accredit them to other individuals or the administration itself by means of certifications. Again, this links back to the earlier statement that certificates are legal tenders in the same category as promissory notes and banknotes, right? And isn't it fascinating that these certificates accredit other individuals or the administration? So the certificates are legal tenders and they are used to accredit or give credit to others. Hold on, does that mean that the birth, death, marriage, divorce certificates, all of these different certificates actually act as a loan to the companies and also the state itself? A loan which actually gives them credit that they can use to do whatever they like, to trade and other things like that, to make a profit on. So hold on a minute. Is the birth certificate, the original one, a security just like a banknote, which actually uses the information on the legal personality identity, which actually links to a living man or woman to make a monetary profit? Okay, things are getting really heated now because all of this evidence is pointing to your information being traded for revenue. But I wonder if you're ever going to get any of this revenue back to you, considering that you are the source of the data that is being traded, and you were the one who accredited others, including the state, with this information that actually has monetary value. That information has monetary value that can be traded and profited off of. So, Section 32 now, this states, moving on from there, the Identity Management Agency will in due course add layers of additional and relevant information as prescribed by law, including photographs, fingerprints, and other biometric elements. The issuance of identity cards or other identity credentials, which in turn will give individuals access to government and private services, together with other documents such as driver's licenses, passports, bank cards, and so forth, will be within the authority of the Identity Management Agency. In a number of countries, the integration of the civil registration system with the identity management system has been a key factor in the creation and maintenance of a secure, efficient, and interoperable population data system. This integration has reaped benefits for both the government and individuals in terms of access to social rights, improved control of public expenditures, and improved underlying data quality for the production of vital statistics. So this shows us that from the birth certificate, additional legal instruments are provided to the individual to allow them to gain access to government and private services, essentially so that the individual can actually function in the world and live a good life, right? To sustain their life on this planet, which they have a right to. These extra instruments, which the examples include driver's licenses and passports, they go on to act as additional legal tenders. So more instruments that can be accredited to others, which then allows you to fully experience your beneficial interest to the birth certificate in the first place. Again, remember, these further legal tenders, such as your passport, they are all still property of the issuing authority, but you hold on to them and you're able to use them to enjoy life and live your life to the fullest without interference from the government and the legal world. Why is that? It is because it is another hidden trust relationship. They are all hidden trust relationships that act as pass-through identifiers to the ultimate trust relationship, which is the trust relationship that exists because of the birth certificate. And the last bit that I want to address is point 33, which reads, issuing identity documents to living individuals. So this highlighted bit, you can see very clearly, it's clear as day that the identity documents are given to the living. They are the holders of the beneficial right to use that property created by the government. This is a very clear trust relationship. Your mother, father, and your ancestors, they all collectively worked to create you, right? And then they registered your existence, acting on your behalf as settler. The government agents at the Register of Births, Deaths, and Marriages then registered your emergence into this 3D world and did all that they had to do in terms of the paperwork and all that stuff. And now all of a sudden, you're a beneficiary of all of these legal instruments and the legal identity. This shows us beyond reasonable doubt that the living individual cannot be the legal identity, as the living individual had to exist first before everything else could come along. The legal personality and the legal instruments, they cannot and will not ever be the same as the living individuals. The next piece of evidence comes from the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 16 states that everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Again, very similar wording to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The UK has ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which means that the UK therefore recognises that the right to personhood is presumed and is therefore a well-established legal principle in our common law. Hopefully, with all that we have discussed already, you can really begin to see how this is all a very well-established presumption, which most people do not realise that is something that they can actually rebut now that they have contrary evidence. So now I would like to cover something very interesting from the HMRC internal manual on VAT registration. So HMRC state that the definition of person in the legislation causes in effect the recognition of two types of persons, referred to as legal person and natural person. The interesting thing is that it is in effect, so it is established as such in practice, even though it hasn't formally been recognized as such, nor is there any law that has actually allowed for this recognition to actually take place. So they say, in effect, we have legal or natural persons. So let's focus on one of these at a time. Legal persons refers to an entity or body which has an existence separate and distinct from the persons comprising that entity or body. Examples are corporate bodies, corporation sole, Scottish partnerships, and European economic interest groupings. So we can see that a legal person is an entity that is completely separate and distinct from the persons that make up that entity. So on the screen, I have hopefully a visually appealing way to show you this. On the top right hand side, you can see three people that are individuals who have their own identities, right? Their own legal personalities represented by the different color circles. And they are all separate and distinct from each other. On the bottom right hand side, you see those three people when they operate together as they operate within a legal person. They operate as a separate identity altogether from their individual identities, so this is represented by the large pink circle. And now on the other hand, you have natural persons. So they do not define natural person, interestingly, but they do tell you examples of natural persons, which are sole proprietors, partnerships, and unincorporated associations. So side note here that is interesting. Remember how the United Nations publications for legal identity, they said that even marriage and divorce certificates are legal tenders, and how we also discussed that they are all securities just like banknotes, right? Well, funnily enough, we can see how it is possible that maybe a marriage could be considered a partnership between two separate legal personalities or legal identities that have joined together under the tradition that one will assume the surname of the other. And that partnership could be a natural person. Hence, that natural person is given a certificate. That's why the certificate is produced. And this is why the tradition of one partner assuming the surname of the other partner is because they become one in the eyes of the law. And also remember in Act 1, where we talked about the legislation description of person and the last section about unincorporated associations, well, see how they are natural persons too. We see that HMRC state themselves that a sole proprietor is a natural person, right? And it is the sole proprietor who is the natural person. So a natural person is a sole proprietor, and it is the sole proprietor that is the natural person as defined in legislation. HMRC also defines sole proprietor, and they say it is used to describe individuals, so the living men and women, engaging in business on their own, with business meaning operating in commerce, right? So for a profit. So we see that a sole proprietor is an individual engaged in business on their own. Again, clearly showing that there is a difference between the sole proprietor and the individual as two separate ideas. The individual, when not engaging in business on their own, they do not fall into the definition of sole proprietor. So they are not a natural person, so they are not a person at all, full stop. Remember also, you exist in a debt-based monetary system. How can you make a profit when all money is debt money or minus money as such? Are liabilities and evidences of debt ever a profit to you? Think about that. So from this information, I have actually made this visual to demonstrate exactly what this all means. So on the left-hand side, it is the diagram I showed earlier when we spoke about a legal person, right? And how the individuals that are part of a legal person, they have their own identities which are separate and distinct from each other. Well, after diving into what a natural person is, you can see that even the individuals themselves, they have identities which are separate and distinct from them as well, especially when operating in commerce. It is the sole proprietor who is recognized in the commercial world only. On the right-hand side, you can see that we all have a natural person or a sole proprietor to be able to operate in the world. So you can get into contracts, so you can sue and be sued, all of it. But again, you are not the person. The distinction is fundamental for you to really grasp with all the might that you have within you. The diagram visually shows that each living man and woman have their own sole proprietor, which is known by the full name and surname, which we know was gifted to the living individual when they were born, right? Which is evidenced on the birth certificate. However, the living men and women, they are just simply known by their first given name or maybe a nickname, right? I mean, think about it. When do you give out your full name? This is usually when you're dealing with the government or other corporations, right? Why do you think that is? It is because when it comes to making a legally valid and enforceable contract or relationship of some kind, they need the sole proprietor. They don't want anything with the living man or woman, because we know that anything to do with a living man or woman, they don't recognize, remember? They only recognize the sole proprietor, the full legal name, the surname, middle names, all of it. So this brings us nicely to the end of Act 2, which I hope you'll agree with me has taken us through some serious rough terrain, with the evidence being so powerful and absolutely undeniable. So hopefully you'll be joining me in Act 3 to round off all this exploration about personhood. So I'll see you in the next one.